Welcome to Season 2, Episode 10 of our monologue series. Today's title is Trauma is Not What It Looks Like, the Feynman Problem in Clinical Practice. There is a problem in how trauma is commonly understood. It's not a small problem. It's a foundational error in observation. Now, Richard Feynman once explained something that at first sounds impossible. He said, trees do not grow from the ground. A mature tree weighs thousands of pounds, and most people assume that mass comes from the soil up, but it doesn't. Careful measurement showed that soil contributes almost nothing to the tree, and water doesn't explain it either. The actual mass of the tree comes from carbon dioxide in the air. The mass comes from an invisible gas, pulled in, structured, and turned into something solid. Now here is the point. The answer was always there in plain view, but it was missed because it violated intuition. And that is exactly what I believe is happening in trauma. Clinicians are often observing the equivalent of soil. They're looking at the story, the content, the narrative, what happened. And they assume that is where the problem is. But that isn't where the problem is. The story is not the mechanism. It's the surface. Trauma is not a narrative disorder. Trauma is an emotional regulation disorder. More precisely, it's a nervous system injury. And like all injuries, it follows a sequence that is completely logical. There's an event, and the nervous system detects a threat, and the sympathetic nervous system activates, flight, fight, freeze. Energy mobilizes, attention narrows, survival becomes a priority. That part works exactly as designed. So the problem is not activation. The problem is resolution after the fact. After the event, the system does not return to baseline. It does not regulate. And when regulation does not occur, the system stays elevated and activated. This is not a psychological weakness. It's a physiological persistence. And this is where the cascade begins. When the nervous system remains activated, sleep is disrupted. And sleep's not optional. Sleep is a primary mechanism through which the brain processes and resolves emotional experience. And when sleep is compromised, emotional memory does not resolve. Now, when emotional memory does not resolve, the system continues to signal threat. So now you have a loop, activation without resolution. Over time, this loop produces predictable outcomes: mental torment, intrusive thoughts, hypervigilance, emotional reactivity or numbness, and eventually the body begins to respond. Chronic tension, inflammation, somatic symptoms. This is not random. It is a logical system operating exactly as it was wired. But if you misidentify the source, you'll misapply the solutions. If you believe the problem is in the story, you'll try and change the narrative, the story. If you believe the problem is the thinking, you'll try and change the thinking. And this is where much of the field of trauma has struggled, because insight doesn't help you regulate your physiology. Understanding does not complete an unresolved response. The actual root is somewhere else. It is what we would call an affective memory, a memory that is not fully resolved at the level of the nervous system. Not the facts of the memory, not the meaning that was given to the memory. The emotional, the physiological charge attached to the memory. To resolve that, we need to understand a few fundamentals. Memory is not fixed, it's dynamic. And through the processes of consolidation and reconsolidation, memory can be updated, but only under specific conditions. The memory must be activated, and it can be activated absolutely safely, without retelling the story. When it is activated, it becomes labial. And that means it's temporarily changeable. There's a window where that change can occur. but not all interventions are equal in that window. So the question should be, what produces the highest probability of resolution in that window where the memory is labial? Not insight, not repetition, not exposure alone. The strongest evidence, unequivocal, points to a different direction. And I'd like you to challenge me on this if you choose. When short-term working memory is heavily engaged, specifically through visual spatial tasking, something very, very important happens. The brain's capacity to maintain emotional intensity of the memory is disrupted. And when that happens, memory reconsolidates differently overnight with reduced or eliminated emotional charge. Now, none of this is theoretical. Research from institutions such as King's College in London or military research settings, including Walter Reed Hospital, have shown that interventions using high levels of visual spatial tasking produce efficacy rates exceeding 90%. And they do so with minimal recurrence. So let's go back to Feynman. The mass of the tree was never coming from the soil. And trauma is not the story. The mechanism is elsewhere, invisible at first glance, but entirely measurable once you know where to look. Trauma is a nervous system injury. Sleep is the clearest signal of unresolved emotional memory. And when affective memory resolves, deep sleep almost always returns. It's not philosophy, it's not woo-woo, it's mechanistic. So when you understand the mechanism, the path to change becomes obvious. Now, if you're a clinician, a coach, or someone who works with human change, this distinction matters. Because precision determines outcome. And when you stop treating the soil, you can finally address the air.